Do School Better, a podcast for people who want to transform education. My name is Doris Korda. In this season, I discuss the core principles of my educational philosophy with Tim Desmond and Alison Tanker, my co-teachers from Hawken School's Entrepreneurial Studies program. It's not about what you teach, it's about what they learn.
In this episode, Doris and Alison discuss the Hawken School Entrepreneurial Studies program and how it is a completely different model for learning and teaching. They reveal how a rigorous academic program using real and urgent business problems is different than teaching how to run a lemonade stand or the traditional business class.
So Doris,
Yeah.
what is this program? I mean, if you had to really describe it in totality, what is this?
Yeah, it's funny because, like many things, the term entrepreneurship has now got so much baggage associated with it. And it is an entrepreneurship program, yes. But what does that even mean? It's really, what it really is an educational model that focuses on mastery of skills. That's really what it is. And again, even that was full of a lot of edge jargon, but the point is, I really don't think, like many people now, thankfully, I don't think traditional school's done a good job at all, or is doing a good job of teaching students skills. And right now, because of technology and the world that we live in, the skills matter more than anything. The skills matter the most. Mm-hmm. And skills include knowing, the world doesn't need humans to spit back from memory the date of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. They don't need that. Does it help if people have enough context to understand that there was a Treaty of Versailles and why it happened? Of course, I'm not suggesting that learning history and content and science and math are hugely important, but equally important is the learning of skills and the development of problem-solving skills. It's a crazy world and things change so much and are so unpredictable that being able to know what questions matter most, those are the kinds of things that the world needs humans to do, that we still don't have any better vehicle for than a human being. Mm-hmm. And we don't develop that well enough in school. So what this is it's a completely different approach to doing school so that the students learn the skills they're going to need in the world that they're going out into.
If we dive a bit deeper into that too, to describe how you're actually fostering some of those skills, what is your process or your approach to doing that? Yeah,
so again, I learned what I think kind of was always obvious to me because it's true for me also, that if I care about something, if something's meaningful to me, then I'll work like crazy because I want to. I don't have to be convinced to. I don't have to be prodded or tricked into. Mm-hmm. So everything I did as a math teacher for all those years was about how do I get these students who, there are students, many of them, who come into a traditional classroom and are motivated to get the good grade. They're motivated to please the teacher or their parents, mm-hmm. or they're motivated by what they think they should be doing. And I get that. But there's so many students who come in and say, I don't know why I should learn this thing that you're having me put all this time and energy into that I just don't care about. So what I've done with this is thought about how do you if you know the learning that you're hoping to happen. So I very much, I think that the skills that are some skills that are crazy important for students to develop, that they'll need for the world they're going into, are how to solve problems that don't have answers in the back of the book. How do you do that? As a math teacher, I had all these students who were very well trained at practicing the same kind of problem over and over with different numbers and then spitting it back and doing it on the test at the end of the week. But the minute I gave them a question that required some thought, they called them story problems back then, that they didn't have any sort of example or experience with, they literally shut down. They were so totally and completely not prepared or willing even to just think about something and take their own resources and look at something they had no experience with on the surface and pick it apart. They had none of that. So I spent a lot of time developing those, working with students to develop those. So this was about how do we give students the ability to learn creative problem solving, like really learn how to do that. How critical thinking. How do students learn critical thinking without a template or a recipe or a set of instructions and nothing more than their very able mind to go at that? How do we teach really, really good communications of all type? Written, verbal, everything. How do we get students to really develop that? How do we get students to learn what it means to collaborate, to be really generative with others? When I was in the working world back in the day, probably that mattered more than anything. My ability to work well with others. Even if I wasn't particularly good at problem solving, if I worked well with others, I had to find somebody who was, and I could contribute what I could contribute. They could contribute what they could contribute. We don't really teach students to collaborate well, and then they get out of college and they go out into whatever they're doing, and they fall apart, and they're shocked because they've gotten straight A's, and in all these years of school where somebody's giving them a grade on their individual thing, the world, which has been teachers and parents, have told them, oh, you're awesome, you're an A+, you're perfect. And then they go out, and actually what matters most is their ability to work well with others, and they've got no experience. That doesn't come naturally to people. Some people are gifted and it comes naturally. For a lot of people, they have to learn through years of trial and error and working with different kinds of personalities and learning about themselves, and having to start that at age 23, and that's the beginning of your education, let alone 28 or 29, and find out when you're in the hot seat that you're unsuccessful, and that's what this program is. It's about having students master these things. And it's crazy rigorous. And by the way, academic. So we've defined academics and what is academic and what isn't. And we've defined these disciplines in such narrow ways in school. And we're so used to it that we don't even question the system that we have grown up in. If you're solving a problem that doesn't have an answer in the back of the book, but you care about solving it, then you want to solve it well. And to solve a complicated, challenging, difficult problem that no one has yet solved, and solve it well, is going to require you to work really, really hard, and it's going to require a certain quality of your output and of thinking and of analysis and all these things. And so, the program we developed, which, as you know, there's so many different sets of systems and parts to it. What I think people, you asked, what is this thing? When you say it's entrepreneurship education, people think business. And often people think, they do pitches, they do fun stuff sitting in a room, having ideas for a startup and then pitching them. And, if it's an entrepreneurship class, or even if it isn't, those things can come into play. But that's so not what this is. This is about how do you structure and guide a path for students to learn, really, really develop these skills by giving them problems in a way and the guidance through the problem solving in a way that makes that learning happen.
What I love that you're talking about here is that we've seen entrepreneurship used in developing countries for economic development purposes. We've seen it used in terms of gender inequality and creating more opportunities for women to be empowered and go out there and bring value to their communities. We've seen a lot of approaches, and those are things I'm very passionate about and I've had experience in as well. And I love the work that you've really been building here is all about how we can also use entrepreneurship as a tool for education reform, for really helping these students gain the meaningful skills they need for the real world, and really applying this in a much different way. So it's not about the content of entrepreneurship as much as it is about the process and building that mindset.
So exactly. So this is an entrepreneurship class, but as you know, I've been working with educators from all over who are teaching humanities classes, science classes, math classes, whatever it is. And really, whether you want to call it using an entrepreneurial mindset or some of the processes or whatever, those come into play. But more than anything else, it's about how do you use something real, a real problem that that the students in your room are going to care about, and there are ways to go about structuring that so that they're problems they care about, so that the learning will happen. And in our entrepreneurship class, students, as a byproduct, learn a lot about business. In other classes, as a byproduct, students learn, say it's an social entrepreneurship class, like, Robert's teaching. They will learn entrepreneurial processes, but they'll also learn a lot about cultures and social issues in developing nations. It really isn't content specific. It's not about entrepreneurship, actually, and it's also not about the content.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think it's exciting to know a number of schools have taken interest in entrepreneurship, that a number of high schools, middle schools, certainly colleges have been developing programs, but that this shows the versatility of the work, and that it doesn't have to be siloed in the same way that we've thought all subjects in school have to remain in their own individual silo, that this is actually applicable because it's more of an approach that you've built out here that's about real problems. And entrepreneurship, as we define it, is about really seeing through opportunities and bringing ideas to life that address real problems in the world. So I think it's exciting to know this can be replicated in a multitude of settings, and it isn't entrepreneurial specific.
Yeah, I mean, so we what are some of the things that, so first of all, it's transdisciplinary. Design plays a huge role in an awful lot of the approach, because in the world, design plays a huge role in solving problems. And, we use whatever parts of things that are relevant and helpful and useful at the time. Lean Launchpad is, whether you're teaching entrepreneurship or frankly you're teaching science, it's the scientific method made real. So it's very useful in, I think, any entrepreneurship class, but also in some other classes. Design thinking is a toolkit. They've done a really nice job of packaging these things up so that educators can use them. And there are techniques that, depending on the moment and depending on the question, come into play. But it's not about teaching business. It's not entrepreneurship being taught as some religion. It's about mastering skills. It's about learning skills, and that's really what it's about. And we happen to have created a vehicle for doing that really powerfully by having students working on whatever the class they're in, problems that are meaningful to them. And then the teachers have a highly developed set of systems that help them guide the students through it. It isn't just throwing a problem in the room and leaving and coming back 3 weeks later, which I've seen happening sometimes.
Sure.
And it isn't that the students don't learn some things during that 3 weeks, but this is highly developed. You've seen it. We have a highly developed set of curriculum for the problem solving part, for reflection, feedback, teaming, communications. Students learn, they write more, read more, they say, than they've ever done, because they need to in order to have quality results and in order to solve the problems they're solving.
Right. And I know a big part of the course as well is to partner with real startups, real entrepreneurs, and that's bringing that truth into the classroom where you're working on real problems. And to your point that it's not, hey, we throw a problem into the classroom and leave. It's also not a teacher constructed problem. It's a problem that we've gone out to identify.
See, that's huge. So let's say, so that's absolutely huge. It isn't a teacher constructed problem. So one of the things that happens when you start a conversation with educators and you're talking about using real problems that matter is that because of the way we do school, very often an educator's go-to place is to start themselves thinking of, okay, what problem should we choose for the, right? And if there's no student choice in the construct of the problem, none, or if it isn't real, if it's just teacher constructed, it actually doesn't feel much different than traditional school. But let's say what you want is you want students to learn Chinese history. Okay, they're American students and you want them to learn something about Chinese history. How do you use what we're talking about here to do that? Well, if you start with the idea that anything that is an important, interesting, complicated, contemporary issue is only evaluated well if one knows its historical context. That you can't look at today and divorce what's happening today in Chinese governance from history. It's, this part is actually like traditional school. As a teacher, you start with, what are my learning objectives? Okay, so if a teacher sits in front of me and says, my learning objective is that my students learn Chinese history, we can still, and we have, come up with ways to use real contemporary problems that matter to someone, that students will engage in and be excited to solve because no one's yet solved them, and have them learning Chinese history as a result.
In addition to some other things, I'm sure, as you said before, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, you have, I know we saw come up in the course, they hit on statistics, they learn about psychology, they learn about all these different content areas in order to solve the
because
problem.
They have to. They also learn a lot about themselves, and so they learn what it is to yourself care about history. Why do I, Doris, care about history? Okay, not why does my teacher tell me I should care, but why do I care? Well, if I'm working on something that's meaningful to me, and the only way for me to do it well, to solve it well, or to address it well, whatever it is to have some to know something about the history, that no one has to tell me why history matters.
Right.
That you have to learn, if you don't know history, it repeats itself or whatever. We don't need to beat on somebody. So yeah, I mean, if you're working on a problem you care about, and in the course of solving it, you better know something about statistics, which you see in our program happens all the time.
Right.
Then I don't start with a lecture on what standard deviation means or what. I don't start with that. Right. But do they end up learning that? Absolutely. And they own it. They don't learn it because I told them this is going to be on your test. They learn it because they can't do what they want to do, what they care to do well, if they don't get it. So they learn it. And it's the kind of learning that as adults, you think about what are the biggest learning moments in your life. You always remember an experience you had of some sort where you had to learn whatever it was for whatever reason, right?
Absolutely.
If I gave you now the history tests that you took in 10th grade, okay, you would fail all of them. So what was the point?
I think it's been amazing to see how you can really take experiential education to the next level in that way, that it hits the important skills, but you're able to do it academically as well, where you're bringing in a lot of important content that's really the students bringing it in themselves in order to solve the problems that...
Well, and you can construct it that way. So if you want them to learn nuclear physics, and you have you have learning objectives, content objectives. These are the things that a student must know coming out of my class. You can construct the learning in such a way that you can construct the course and the curriculum and the path in such a way that they must learn those things. Okay, does it mean there's never ever any lecture? No. Does it mean, are there any absolutes in this? No. And when people tell me, I believe there should never be anybody lecturing, I don't even know what that means, right? Our programs could not be more flipped, right? The work happens, online. All kinds of stuff happens outside of class. I don't come in the mornings and lecture, but are there moments when students need me to, when they're asking for, hey, will you teach us this? And I stand there with a whiteboard and say, yeah, here we go. And for 15 minutes or whatever, that's a lecture.
Sure.
Okay, now it's interactive. It's what they asked for.
Right.
There's a lecture. Do the students know nuclear physics on their own? Can they can they figure out everything they need to know about statistics by themselves? No. So you guide them through that, and there are all kinds of ways we do that. You don't have to know everything, but it's really academic and it's really rigorous. It's just different.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Do School Better. We would love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment or a review. And if you're interested in learning more, check out wildfire-education.org.